I'm on record voting against Common Core. Now, I said it before, I'll say it again. I was against Common Core before being against Common Core got to be so cool.
You know, when we hear the candidates talk about how we can more effectively use our taxpayer dollars, we often hear a lot of rhetoric. But if you've been in the State Department of Education for the last 3 years and you've had an opportunity to make a difference, and yet we're spending more and more money. You know, the most recent plan is going to be to spend more money and create a whole new level of bureaucracy in the State Department of Education with the new reading plan, with more technology, more data mining, more spending. So if we're going to fix this problem of spending less money and bringing more competition, we've got to see something change. So I'm seeing a lot of lip service paid to these issues that we believe in, and if you want something different, then you've got to elect somebody different. The candidate that just spoke has been in the Department of Education for the last 3 years. She says she's against Common Core, but she has only done things to advance it. She is the one that authored the No Child Left Behind waiver that committed our state further to the Common Core standards. She's the one who pushed through the Common Core science standards, gave them a new name, and pushed them through last summer, and yet she expects that we're going to trust her to rewrite the ELA and math standards. You have to look at actions that are deeper than words when you elect the next superintendent. But let me just address this issue of the No Child Left Behind waiver. You know, the No Child Left Behind waiver is, again, Charmeka wrote the waiver that committed us further to the Common Core standards. And, you know, states across the nation are now being threatened by the Obama administration for backing out of, you know, the Common Core standards. And the Obama administration is saying, we're going to withhold your Title I funds. Well, if I am your next superintendent of education and the Obama administration makes that threat to us, I will say to them, keep your Title I funds.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we've got to start doing. We don't need to work through the system and, you know, work through all the channels and do what we can to work with them. We've got to start standing up to the federal government and saying, keep your money. Because I've got news for you. The Title I funds they have threatened to keep from us, that has never happened before in the country. The only time that anything has ever happened to the Title I funds before was in California. And the only amount that they kept was 1%, the administrative portion. In fact, we managed to come up with an extra $60 million here this year to increase revenue for spending on education. So I think we could manage to get by with that administrative portion if the federal government threatens to withhold our Title I funds because we reject Common Core. That's the kind of superintendent we need, one that's going to stand up to the feds and say, keep your money.
I need you to believe in things that are factually incorrect. For example, this notion that the No Child Left Behind waiver further committed us to Common Core shows a lack of understanding. Waivers are temporary. In fact, it expires here this upcoming year. Long before Common Core under state law would have expired, to use terms loosely. The fact of the matter is that our state had already committed to Common Core state standards. The waiver addressed a whole other issue. And while the state had to describe what we were doing to implement college and career standards, the bottom line is this: a waiver is temporary. So just be mindful of folks who want to describe things and take liberties with historical facts and present to you inaccuracies that you very easily check. But the reality is that waiver is a temporary thing that help address one major problem, though we have other major problems that we are going to have to address as a state. No Child Left Behind waiver did not further commit us to Common Core.
The State Board of Education is appointed by the state legislature. And it is unfortunate that so many of them don't seem to be conservative, when supposedly, you know, we have a conservative Senate and House. So that's an issue that really needs to be addressed, and I think it needs to be addressed by the grassroots, and particularly the grassroots movement that has been so active in South Carolina, stopping Common Core. And once I'm elected superintendent of education, it is my goal to move that grassroots movement effort toward replacing State Board of Education members, because the superintendent of education needs a board that they can work with. So first of all, let me just correct a misnomer. The superintendent of education will appoint the writing panel. The standards are not written by the Board of Education. They have to be approved by the State Board of Education, but the writing team is appointed by the superintendent. So that is an extremely important role, and the superintendent will work to direct that team. So again, that's the most significant thing that I think needs to happen first and that you need to consider. So in addition to that, I have to say, as far as Dr. Mick Zace and his role, you know, I voted for Dr. Zace, and I expected a lot from him, and there were some good things that he did. But I also know that while I was leading the fight against Common Core, I was very disappointed because we contacted him, we wanted more from him, he refused to meet with us. We wanted him to do public forums where both sides were presented. He would not do that. He threw his hands up in the air and he said, I have no power. As your superintendent of education, I will not behave that way. I will take every power afforded to that office and I will use it to influence the legislature, to influence the State Board of Education, and I will do everything I can to achieve the things that we know need to happen. And in addition to the Common Core issue, it is this issue of the liberal indoctrination of our children with our tax dollars. And I will use every power afforded that office to influence that in our state. And no other candidates talking about that.
Yes, it is essential that we work with the South Carolina General Assembly to make sure that they are appointing members of the board who are going to advance conservative policies, because that is the role of the State Board of Education. The State Superintendent of Education, largely, their primary function is to run the South Carolina Department of Education. One of the things I think we also need to look at is just recognizing, again, just facts and not fiction. Okay? The reality is that when the writing panel is finished, the standards come to the board. I know this because I've seen it firsthand. And the State Board of Education can go in and tweak and rewrite the standards however they see fit. The superintendent hands them over, and then they move on to the State Board of Education and then to the Education Oversight Committee, the entities that the South Carolina General Assembly has empowered with power over the state standards. And so there are things I could go on and on clarifying about what is actually the role of the State Board and what is actually the role of the State Superintendent of Education. I'm not going to stand up here and campaign against a four-star general who has represented our state very well. I think it's kind of ridiculous to campaign against someone who is not seeking re-election. But I will say that it's important that we stand strong on making a decision based on what power the state superintendent and what is actually the power of the State Board of Education.
Really, there's probably no need for me to do this rebuttal, but you know, I said exactly what the facts are. I did say that the superintendent appoints the writing team, and then the standards have to be approved by the board. That's exactly what I said. She just came behind me and said that it was fiction. And you know, the truth of the matter is, I'm not campaigning against Dr. Zace, but she has willingly accepted Dr. Zace's endorsement. And I was stating to the question, what would I do as superintendent of education, and what powers does that office have? And when I was sitting at the Senate education hearing, when we were trying to pass S-300 to repeal Common Core, Senator Wes Hayes was presiding over that meeting, and he was livid because Dr. Zace's people were there fighting to keep the Common Core tests. They were there trying to beg them to keep the Common Core tests. And supposedly he's against Common Core. And Senator Hayes was livid because he wasn't even there to state whether he had an opinion on repealing Common Core. And he told his staff that. What is Senator Hayes' opinion on Common Core? And they couldn't even give an answer, whether he was against it or not. So I'm just saying there was far more that superintendent could have done. I don't care if he is a four-star general. My father was a retired brigadier general in the United States Air Force, and I have ultimate respect for a general officer. So I'm not disparaging his service to our country. I have the utmost respect for him as a general officer and any man that served this country. But I do not respect the fact that he claims to be against Common Core and did not do anything to help us stop it.
All right.